Well, I'm sure everyone has heard the news. The Pac 12 will be staying in existence. They are adding four Mountain West teams. Boise State, who's a very, very solid program. They've been so for a while. They've actually got one of the best winning percentages in FBS history. Of course, a lot of that also has to do with being in an easier conference, but still, Boise State, that's a good addition. Fresno State, they've been a very solid team recently. San Diego State, they've got a decent pedigree. Recently, they haven't been so good. And then also Colorado State. Colorado getting into that market, I'm sure they're very happy about that. But Colorado State recently not very good. So that'll be four new teams joining Oregon State and Washington State, who are still part of the Pac 12 technically, although this year I would say the Pac 12 just doesn't exist. It is Oregon State and Washington State virtually playing a full Mountain West schedule for the next few years. And then you will be getting the four teams joining, along with, we would imagine, several others, because they do have to get to at least 8 teams for the league to remain intact, which at this point, we definitely think it's going to happen. Of course, there were also reports saying that there were many schools that have reached out to the Pac 12 talking about potentially joining the league. But I do want to look at the potential list of 9 schools to watch, along with my opinion and potentially some schools that I think should be looking at joining this conference to make the conference just more competitive. I guess my overall take, though, on the whole idea of the Pac 12, this is really not the Pac 12. This is a group of 5 league. Let's be honest. The Pac 12 lost all of its big boys. They have the leftovers, Washington State and Oregon State, and now they're trying to kind of rebuild, but they're not rebuilding with Power 4 teams. They're rebuilding with group of 5 teams. So this is going to be a de facto group of 5 league. It still is attractive for a lot of these schools to look to join the Pac 12 because of the pedigree that the Pac 12 has, but it's still a group of 5 league. It's not like it's being rebuilt. I mean, it's being rebuilt and it's like the idea of the Big Ten losing everyone outside of Indiana and Northwestern and then taking on the entire MAC and calling that the Big Ten. It's really not. This is really not the Pac. I mean, we can call it the Pac 12, but it's really a group of 5 league. But either way, let's take a look at the schools to watch for expansion. They've got Memphis, Tulane, UTSA, Cal, Stanford. So I guess I'll talk about Cal and Stanford first. The idea there would be the ACC dissolves because there's still rumors that might happen. They're trying to remedy it by giving certain teams like Clemson and FSU a bigger share, like unequal revenue distribution. The last time I checked, that's what they were trying to do. We'll see if that ends up happening. The reason there was no news this summer, I think, is probably because both the Big Ten and the SEC said right now there's no room for you in talking to both FSU and Clemson. And that's why we started hearing the rumors that maybe FSU and Clemson would go to the Big 12 if the Big 12 did some type of unequal revenue sharing deal. But right now, it just depends. Can FSU and Clemson find a spot or get a spot in either the SEC or the Big Ten? If that happens, that's going to be the first domino to fall in the ACC. And we know how these things work. Just like with the Pac-12, it happens quickly. Although I will say with the ACC, the reason it's hard to see it completely going away is because the amount of bottom feeder teams that they have that I don't even think the Big 12 would really be interested in. There's like 5 or 6 teams that I think they would at least still be a conference, although it would be a group of 5 conference. And then you'd be looking at the ACC possibly taking teams like Memphis and Tulane. So is that another thing that could happen? I guess we'll see. But when it comes to Stanford and Cal, the only way they join, I think, with that exit fee that they have would be the ACC dissolving to where they could get out, and then they would just rejoin the Pac-12, which would make the most sense in terms of travel. We talk about travel, and you've got Memphis as one of the top teams to join this new formed Pac-12. But no, I think Memphis would be a good team for the league. I think Tulane would as well. I'd love to see North Dakota State. I think that would be awesome. Although in terms of TV market, they're not going to be wanted, but still just in terms of competitiveness to have a good conference. UTSA, they would be a decent choice. Obviously, Cal, Stanford. UNLV is going to be there, the Las Vegas market. Also, Air Force, Wyoming, New Mexico, kind of lower tier teams when it comes to the Mountain West. That's kind of the teams that they've already added, like a Colorado State, things like that. But I would say if you want to get back to 12, maybe 14, I mean, with these leagues, it's impossible to say how big it's going to grow just because we've got leagues, Big Ten and the SEC, they want a 18, 20 team conference. So it's just how big does it get? Does it get to 12? Does it get to 14? Right now it's at 6. You would expect at least 4 more teams to get to 10. I mean, obviously they need 2 more teams, but I think their the top teams on their list should be Cal and Stanford, but that would take something kind of a miracle. I mean, wouldn't it be crazy if they were able to get other teams from the ACC if the ACC completely dissolved? I mean, I wonder who they would try and go after at that point. Like, let's say they take Cal, Stanford, maybe they go after a Virginia as well. Virginia Tech, it'd be interesting to think about that. Get kind of the inverse of what happened. The Pac-12 comes back to life and the ACC goes bye-bye with all the top teams going to the Big Ten, the SEC, and the Big 12, and then the Pac-12 taking up all the scraps of the ACC. But in this scenario, I would say you would certainly want Memphis. You would want Tulane. I would say UTSA, yeah. Obviously, Cal and Stanford. UNLV, they've been good recently. Although, I don't know. UNLV was pretty bad there for a little while. Air Force, Wyoming, New Mexico, I think really don't improve the conference very much at all. But again, it's important people understand this is a group of 5 conference. It is not the same Pac-12 that it was 2-3 years ago with Oregon, USC, UCLA, Washington, teams like that. So this is a group of 5 league, even though it technically is the Pac-12, and a lot of these teams are going to want to join it. And there's been reports they've already tried to talk about potentially joining it since the report came out that those 4 Mountain West teams were coming in. This is a situation to where it's really just the pedigree of the name, the brand name, the Pac-12 that is going to carry it for them. And I do think they will at least, you would think, add 4 teams, possibly even more. And it just depends what happens to the ACC with something like Cal and Stanford. I don't necessarily think the ACC is going to dissolve, but it's also weird. What if they lose like 4 or 5 teams? What would Cal and Stanford do at that point? Do they have an exit fee? Does it potentially get waived? I guess we'll have to wait and see when it comes to that. But either way, this, you got to like, I guess, that the Pac-12 is staying together. I thought it was either this, where they were going to take on a bunch of Mountain West teams, or it would be both Washington State and Oregon State joining the Mountain West. And because that's basically what they've done. I mean, the next 2 years, I believe, they have this big Mountain West schedule where it's 7 or 8 teams from the Mountain West, along with the rivalry games, because Washington is facing Washington State this week. And you do also have Oregon State facing Oregon. And then they face each other, and then they face a bunch of Mountain West teams. That's their schedule this year and also next year. So we will have to see what ends up happening when it comes to the other teams that will be joining. Certainly, when you talk about where they're located, the Pac-12 getting Memphis, that would be a little bit ridiculous. It would be a lot more digestible to stay and take an Air Force from Colorado, UNLV from Nevada, Wyoming, a team like New Mexico. But again, those teams really wouldn't, I don't think, add much in terms of competitiveness to the league. But this is, at this point, it is a de facto group of 5 league. And honestly, Washington State and Oregon State, in terms of competitiveness, should be extremely happy by this development. They're going to have a legit chance to be competitive. But I do think Boise State probably is still going to be a top dog in that league when you look at it, just because of how good they've been in terms of their program history. And it's not like Washington State and Oregon State, even though especially Oregon State's been better recently in terms of their success on the field. It's still something I would say where Boise State would be the number 1 team in that league, and then Oregon State. And then you'd probably look at other teams. I mean, Memphis this year is really good. Tulane has been good the past 4 or 5 years. UTSA this year, they're very bad, but normally they're decent. Cal and Stanford, I mean, they've got the Olympic stuff. They're, when it comes to the academics, obviously they would want both of those teams, but they just joined the ACC, so it's complicated. If the ACC stays together, they're not going to leave that, especially with the exit fee, especially the fact that it's not like this new, TV deal that the Pac-12 is going to have. It's not going to be very lucrative because they're not getting any huge blue blood programs. It's going to be, the conference is going to be carried by the pedigree. And then also another thing I wanted to look at was other teams that could join it. Rice. So this is just based on TV market. I think Rice would be a terrible addition, but again, that's based on TV market. UTSA, that was another team that has already been talked about. North Texas. So they want to get into that TV market there in the state of Texas. There it is. The Metroplex ranks 5th. So this is just based off of TV markets. It looks like Memphis. I think Memphis is going to be like an A1 top of the line team that could potentially join. North Texas, it depends if they really want the TV market. UTSA could be another team that joins. Rice would be kind of a dud, but it'd be based around TV market. But either way, when it comes to them, how many teams will join? What's my prediction? I think Memphis probably will. Again, a lot of this has to do with Memphis is sitting there wondering what's going to happen to the ACC, because if you look at where we're located in the United States, it would be so much more easier if, think about it, we were talking about both FSU and Clemson going to the SEC or the Big Ten, and then Memphis going to the ACC, and it fits like a glove. Now, the reason that didn't happen was because FSU and Clemson, they didn't get an offer. Because if they would have gotten an offer from the SEC or the Big Ten this summer, they would have left. And that's why the Big 12 came into play and said, hey, we're going to give you maybe unequal revenue. Why don't you come here? It didn't end up happening. But I do think both of those teams, something's going to have to give. They're either going to have to get more money from, and that TV deal is going to have to be renegotiated, that horrible TV deal, the grant of rights through 2036, or they're going to leave to one of the conferences at some point. And when they get an invite, they'll wait for the invite. And so if that happens, if you're Memphis, would it make more sense to stay right now where you are in the American and wait for FSU and Clemson to leave and then you join the ACC? And in terms of travel, it's so much more easier. And also, that's not a conference that's too daunting, especially if FSU and Clemson are out. And also Miami, now that Miami is a team that's looking really good, they're probably going to make the playoff this year, although it's early. That's another thing to take into account. That's interesting to see if Memphis would maybe jump the gun and join the Pac-12 with horrible travel, when they could potentially join the ACC. When it comes to all those other teams, those are the teams that are not joining the ACC. Rice, UTSA, North Texas. I think Tulane might be able to join the ACC if they lost several teams. That would be the other team I would look at that conference. But if you're looking at like the best fit, it's Stanford, it's Cal, it's possibly UNLV with Vegas. Those would be the best fits in terms of the way. Also Air Force, although Air Force doesn't add much to the conference. But that's just my take on everything that's going on right now. Either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.